Welcome to Releasing Your Inner Dragon with Drake and Marie. I am your half host, Maxwell Alexander Drake. I'm an award-winning novelist, lead fiction writer for, or was the lead fiction writer for Sony's EverQuest Next and a bunch of other things. As always, I'm here with my partner in crime, Marie.
Hi, my name is Marie. I am a fantasy author of the Sangwheel Chronicles, and I have a world-building channel called Just in Time Worlds.
As always, if you're getting stuff out of this, please help us out and growing the channel by subscribing, hitting the notification bell, adding it to your favorites, sharing it with your friends. I know you guys are in some type of writers group, either on Discord or Reddit or Facebook or whatever. Just throw it out there. Just say, hey guys, I don't know if you guys have heard about this Releasing Your Inner Dragon podcast, but they've got some decent information. You might want to check it out. A little bit goes a long way to helping us out. Okay, so today we're going to tackle a topic that is controversial and very difficult to pull off. Didn't do a ton of prep work on this, so we'll see where the conversation goes as we discuss this. But we're going to discuss villains, but from a writing standpoint. In other words, either villains as a POV or villains as, you know, some people do them in like a prologue or an epilogue or something like that. And so we're just going to kind of meander around and talk about the subject of villains in general and how we get their side of the story to the audience, and also, is it good to get their side of the story to the audience? And so we're just going to kind of ramble on like that. So Marie, why don't you start off? Like, how have you handled trying to get the villain's perspective to your readers?
So what I do with my villains is I don't do a POV from the villain's perspective, mostly because I feel that adding the villain's POV, like if it's an actual villain, I'm not talking about Game of Thrones style of villainous characters, you know, like real villains, the overcome villains. You know, the equivalent in Game of Thrones would be if we suddenly had like the Night King from the zombies be a POV, like that would be weird. So the way that I handle it is I write a prologue and sometimes an epilogue from the perspective of a victim of the villain, which is why in my prologues, the POV character that it's told from dies every time, right? Because my villains are like that. And the epilogues are slightly different. So that's how I try and bring it in. And to me, it's more kind of tone setting. I don't like to draw the curtain back and show the plans of the villains, because my biggest problem with that is I feel it reduces the tension, the overall tension level of the novel, when you can see the villain's weaknesses and foibles. And like, I don't think it helps to humanize the villain. I think it helps to reduce the tension of the plot, because you reach the point where you're like, well, the characters could just ignore this, and you know, the villainous people have got so many internal factions, they just collapse all by themselves. Like, yeah, not so great for the tension of the plot. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's how I handle. How about you? How do you handle it?
I think I've probably done everything. So obviously prologue's really good. It not only sets the tension, but it sets, so like the third book of Genesis, which was never released, which I will be rewriting once I get there. Hopefully it'll come out in what, 25? As long as I keep up my schedule of what I'm doing. And yes, for those Genesis Oblivion fans out there, I don't know if I've announced this publicly, but June of next year is when the director's cut of book 1 will be coming out. So it's over 200,000 words. It's insanely massive. We're doing, or I should say, I'm doing an all cast audiobook version of it. I've already got like 20 actors cast for all the different roles and all of that stuff. It's going to be pretty epic. In the third book of that was the first time I dip into the villain's head. She's not even really in the world until then. So this is kind of the first time that she is available to be in a scene. But I don't even do it from her perspective, because you're exactly right. I don't want to give my readers access to the mind of my villains. Unless, now I have written, it was a novella, but I wrote a novella that actually is one of the novellas that was released for the Genesis saga. where I do put you in the head of one of the bad guys, and the whole thing is from this bad guy's perspective. He's an ass. I mean, he literally is. Not only is he killing, you know, anyone on the good side, but he also hates the side he works for. So he kills them as much, you know, anytime he can get away with it without getting in trouble. So like there's these really hardcore informants in this enemy city that takes forever to try to get actual informants and, you know, double agents and everything like that. And so he's supposed to meet them and get some information, but it's on another continent. So he knows that, you know, more than likely, since they don't have any other agents in the city but this one guy, so he kills him after he gets the information, and he does it literally going, ha, I just screwed over my boss, it's gonna take him forever to get another one in here. Like he just is an asshole, like completely. He hates everybody. And so that was fun. But that's actually the creation of one of the characters from the saga, and so that's why I wrote it. It's a backstory piece.
And the thing is, like, it's fine from a novella perspective, right? And I guess if you were writing a tragedy, it's fine from a tragic, you know, from that perspective. The problem is, if you're writing this scene, like if you were writing that scene in the middle of like a novel where you're following the good guys who are opposing this, you know, this character, now you see that in fact this character is happily killing his own people, which reveals that there's these factions in the evil side that the good side can exploit.
Right.
And because the characters haven't, like, it's not the characters who know this, it's the reader who knows this. So the characters can't take advantage of it. You can't use it in the overcome because it's not the characters who know it, but the reader knows it, which reduces the tension for the reader.
Right.
So the characters are still like, oh my God, look at these evil guys. You know, they're so big and so powerful, and this organization is going to be so devastating. And the reader's going, no, it's not.
Right.
I know what's going to happen.
Right.
And you don't want that situation. You want the reader to feel as it's interesting because I had a conversation when Harry Potter book, whatever it was, where Snape swore the unbreakable vow at the beginning. I think it was book 6 or book 7 or wherever it was.
One of those two. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's not a writer. And at the time I wasn't either. I mean, you know, I was, I don't know, in my early 20s somewhere. And he said, he said to me that he hated that scene because he said it immediately removed the doubt in his mind as to whether Snape was, on which side Snape was. And he said that was a terrible decision because now he no longer feels tense about the book. Now he's one of those readers who see through plot twists with half a clue, you know. So, and there are those readers out there. Not all readers are like that.
But that wasn't even half a clue. That was literally like a posted sign on a bulletin board. Yeah,
it was a bat to the face. You
know?
Right. But that's kind of my point. Is like, yes. It to you as the reader, to you as the writer, it looks like a pretty scene. It looks like, you know, you're giving people the opportunity to like experience your villain. And maybe there are some readers who are like, oh, that's such a cool way, you know, I like the way this turned out, whatever. But for the majority of readers, I think, at least for me, but now you've just wrecked my tension because I know more than the characters do.
That leads me to two things. One, just really quick. Anyone's tongue around me knows that the one thing that infuriates me more than anything else in movies or TV shows is the 18 hours earlier bullcrap, where you show me the end of your episode and then you say 18 hours earlier. And now I'm just literally watching the show up to the point that I already know the ending of. Like, literally, why would you spoil that? And I don't know why they keep doing it. And well, I do know why, because they think that it adds tension. But exactly like what you just said, it doesn't. Not only does it not add tension, it takes away tension. So instead of going, oh my goodness, how's this going to turn out? How's this going to turn out? It's like, well, I know how it's going to turn out. You know, like and I love John Wick, but I always pick on this because it opens with him in a black SUV kind of rolling up against the wall and hitting it, and the door opens up and he falls out and he's got a gunshot wound, and he opens up a picture of his wife, and you know, it's like, well, I know where this movie's going to end right there. John Wick still alive with a gunshot wound, probably dying there. Well, that, like, okay. Not that I mean, that's the thing. You get a movie like John Wick, you know John Wick's not dying.
And John Wick is one of the few examples where it's done better than most. Because
maybe.
Because at least the John Wick scene, like you still wonder what happens afterwards. Right? They still, at least, because they don't show you like a full kind of denouement. Okay. That TV show that I recently quit watching after like 10 minutes, you open on the funeral and then you go back 2 weeks. I'm like, you've just shown me that literally all of these guys die. And you haven't shown me, like, there's no reason for me to, like, what?
Yeah. And we've already discussed it. You reminded me of that, because it's still kind of the same thing with a villain.
Yeah.
You know, revealing that information is not advantageous as you think it is.
No.
So it's one of the reasons why in all my classes, the number one thing that I say every class, at least once, if not 20 times, is it's always about the reader. Yeah. It's not about you. It's about the reader. You know, and that's not, you know, again, every time I say that, somebody goes, oh, well, you're just a sellout. Then no, I'm not. I'm doing my job to the best of my ability, because my job is them. If I'm a chef, I'm not cooking for me, I'm cooking for them. I might have told this story before on this podcast, but my mother owned restaurants. I'm a restaurant kid. I came up in it. And one of the things she owned was a 5-star restaurant. And the chef, his most famous dish was this shrimp dish. Literally, people would come from other states to eat this dish. He was allergic to shrimp. Couldn't eat it. Had never tried it. No idea what it tasted like, but it was freaking delicious. It's what I ate every time I went to that restaurant. I was like, that's what I'm eating, which broke my heart, because my mother has lost that recipe. You know, she's retired and all of that, but she had all the recipes. And from that restaurant, they're gone, or at least most of them are gone. But that recipe in particular, because I would love to make that for myself. And I've tried. I've just never been able to duplicate the massive deliciousness that this one chef did with this one shrimp pasta dish.
And he couldn't eat it himself.
And he couldn't even eat it himself. He couldn't even try it. I mean, it's not even like, oh yeah, no, I've tasted it, I just don't like shrimp. I can't even taste it. And it was one of the best things ever. Yeah. So it's not selling out, because again, I am my number one fan. I love my stuff more than anyone else. I just make sure that it's not about me, the writer, going, oh, it'd be cool if I did X. It's about me, the reader, going, oh my goodness, if I was to read this scene, ooh, I would have all these emotions and I'd have all this stuff. So for me, when I say it's all about the reader, I'm talking about Drake, the reader, because I am right in the center of epic fantasy fandom. You know, I love it all, and I know exactly what I want out of a fantasy. And it seems like, and that's, I think, what has made me successful, is that it seems like what I like out of fantasy, the vast majority of fantasy fans like. And so as long as I'm pleasing me, and because I've discovered that I'm kind of in the center of that bubble, then the vast majority of people are going to follow me down that path. Yeah. So it's always about the reader, but I wonder, the thing I wanted to chase, it's a little off topic, but I think it's going to be interesting to chase this rabbit for a second. I also think about what you just said, reader knowledge. So yes, you're right. If you give the readers information that the character doesn't know, you absolutely cannot let that character act upon that, which is why I rarely, if ever, I was trying to think of if I ever any examples of my own work where I actually did something like that. And I don't think I have, because again, I know it ruins the tension, and I don't want to give my reader something that the character is going to discover later. I just don't do that. However, what I do, and yes, I just said do, I'm 13. What I do in my writing all the time is that I don't repeat myself in things like world building or, you know, whatever. So I on purpose set up different characters. And one of the reasons why I love writing multiple characters is because it gives me the ability to not info dump, you know, massive things. So I can build one piece of something that's world building through one character, because they absolutely don't know what it is, but they know what this other stuff is. But there's guaranteed to be another character that doesn't know some of that other stuff. And so I can world build through different characters without having to, you know, this character's experienced this thing, so I got to explain that. I can just go, okay, well, I'm building my magic system because I got a character who doesn't know anything about magic. And so he's like, ooh, how does this work? And he does this. But in the next character, you're in the head of a mage I'm not even going to describe it. I've already done that in the last chapter. I already know reader knowledge is already there. And so when I get into the mage's head, now it's just like, oh yeah, no, I'm just doing my thing. You know, I'm not, this is not, and I'm big on that. I push my students and my,
I mean, I agree with that completely. I mean, I do the same kind of thing. I have, you know, what's world built in this, I'm not going to repeat in that, you know, and in fact, if characters tell each other things, like, you know, when the characters meet up in Ducal Air and they're like exchanging information, whatever, I don't repeat everything that the reader knows. I go like, and she told them about blah, 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 because the reader knows all that crap.
Right.
You know, the only time I'd repeat that is if she's deliberately obscuring parts. And even then I try and summarize it in such a way.
And it's a single point. It's the same reader. So.
But to bring this back to villain POVs, because this rabbit hole brought me back to villain POVs.
Yeah.
I strongly feel that your villain POVs should not, if you're writing from the actual villain's point of view, you should not be doing it purely for information purposes.
Right.
If you purely want to convey information about the bad guys to the reader, then I think that you should do it through a peripheral narrator, whether that person is alive or dead at the end of it, right? Rather than the actual active villainous POV.
Right.
And the reason why I say that is because the inside of your villain's head should either be secret or terrible or both. And why would your reader want to be on the inside of your villain's head if it's a really terrible, like, person? You know, firstly, you'd have to do a lot of work to cement me into a villain's character. And secondly, if you put them in the villain's head, they know everything that the villain knows at that point. So you could only keep things secret by being really weird about it.
That's the thing. Another thing I say is don't lie to your readers.
Yes.
So my villains are villainous. They are trying to win. They are not trying to lose at this game, and they do not want to lose at this game. And so, yeah, if you go inside of the villain's head and you don't give the reader information, then that's just you lying to them. And I don't cotton to that. I don't agree with that. I think you should give.
And man, I hate it in any POV when it's like, and the character goes, you know, and I have this plan, and then there's a scene break or whatever, and I'm like, no.
Right.
don't scene break on I have this plan. Scene break on she's trying to think about a plan, or scene break on let's discuss options and see if we can come up with a plan. But when you go like, when you scene break on literally I have a plan, then you're just hiding your plan from me. And it feels so artificial.
It's that they do it in TV shows and movies all the time, where it's like, and what we're going to do is fade to black.
Yes.
And it's like,
that annoys me. It really, like, for me, it's not a tension building device because it feels so fake.
It's also assumed.
Yeah.
Like, if you have a scene with a villain, it's assumed that they have thought about what they're going to do next.
Yeah.
So saying, and this is what I've thought about doing next,
yeah,
is sort of, to me, it's sort of the same thing as writing, you know, this is stupid, Drake thought to himself. Like, who else is Drake thinking to? Like, so it's just assumed if I write Drake thought, that I write Drake. Because if you're going to do that, then you might as well also write, every time you have dialogue, you know, pushing air through his lungs and forming, you know, or past his vocal cords and using his mouth to form words, Drake said. Like, it's just, these things are crazy to me.
But I do, like, I strongly feel that a villain POV should not be just about conveying information to the reader. Rather, if you really need to convey something that you cannot do through a actual POV character, then use a peripheral narrator and put it in an epilogue or put it in an interlude, you know, because you're not going to have regular POVs like that. So it's going to be like a once off here and there. So maybe do an interlude or a prologue or an epilogue where you use a peripheral narrator.
See, I don't even like, so like in Stormlight Chronicles from Brandon Sanderson, there's those interludes that are in the middle of each one of them that are quite robust. And every time I hit those, I was like, if I wasn't if I didn't have such deep OCD when it comes to storytelling, I would skip these, but I can't because my OCD won't let me skip anything in a story. I have to read every single word. And so therefore I have to read these. But every time I'm like, why did I don't feel like I'm going to get the payoff. And of course he hasn't finished the series. So maybe he does, tie this thing. And I haven't read the third one. So I'm only going off the first two books as of right now. But I just, those bothered me.
So that's why I prefer like to do an epilogue and prologue, because those are acceptable kind of places. Yes, they're, as long as you don't go too long, but those are places that people feel you can have.
Well, and that's the two reasons. So what I was going to say is I don't feel that I'm going to get payoff enough to have diverted my attention. But secondly, I'm interested in the story I'm reading. And now I've got to read 50, 60 pages of something else. And I'm chomping at the bits to get back to. So just that alone, even if those are instrumental, even if the payout is amazing, even if they're, wonderfully written, the fact that me as the reader am still going to be distracted because I'm worried about getting back to the actual thing that I'm already interested in. Because of that, as a reader, I feel like I'm already going to give less attention to these interlude pieces that you're trying to shove down my throat.
Especially because, like in a prologue or an epilogue, you're at the end of the book or at the start of the book. So there's no more, or you're just getting into the story.
Right.
But in the middle of the book, you are literally being removed from the story. It's tension breaking, in my opinion.
Yep.
In my opinion, like obviously.
Yeah. I feel the same way, and that's why, like I said, Sanderson's my second favorite author. I love him to death. He's a great person as well as a great writer. We're not close enough when we're convention buddies. So he knows me, we talk, we've shared a meal, whatever. We're definitely not close enough friends for me to go, so these interludes that you wrote, I really didn't like what you did there. Why did you? Like, we're just not that tight. And maybe one day it happens, but more than likely not. We're not in the same circles.
Yeah.
But basically, to bring this back to the villain side, because there's three aspects that I kind of want to hit here, and this is the first. One is just writing from the villain's POV. If the villain is the overcome, if the villain is who we're fighting against, and so on and so forth. And we're both in agreement on this, and hopefully you guys are kind of seeing. It's very hard if you're going to drop into the villain's head. You're going to either lie to your reader because you want to hide some stuff or whatever. So peripheral narrators do it in prologues or epilogues, kind of those way. I think me and Marie are both in agreement, but let us know what you guys think. If we miss something on that specific edge, or you're like, no, I disagree with you, or whatever, throw it in the comments. We read them all. So we'd love to, kind of hear what you guys think. But
I think I do want to put a caveat on that. I do think that is most relevant in cases where your villain is truly villainous. Like, you're not trying to tell a humanizing villain. You're not trying to put a villain that has like human motivations and so on. Like, they're just wrong, and they're going to tragically end up dying because they can't change. Like, that's a different thing.
Right. And that's actually where I want to get to on the third aspect.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. We are assuming that
villain, like horrible in their head is madness and chaos and black evilness, or just plain old evilness. Like, there is no redeeming these guys. Well, they would kill a child and smile over the body, right? Those kinds of people.
Let's chase that for a minute, because so I don't like villains that are villainous because they're evil.
That depends on what
I don't think that's realistic. I don't think
that depends on what you mean. So let's define here a moment, because like, I would define someone as evil if they have ambition untempered by compassion.
Certainly. That's our definition of it.
Yeah.
But what I mean is, and so I was like, it doesn't happen in real life. The reason why I've stuttered is because I was like, well, technically, so we've had a couple over the last couple of decades of you know, people walking in and killing 5-year-olds, you know, at a school. And this is not, you know, it happened recently, but it's happened a couple times here in the United States. I can't see any way to justify even the person thinking that. It makes me go, if you're not totally gone mentally, you have to know what you're doing is evil. Like so what I was going to go with is, it's more realistic to me that the villain is trying to do something that they see as good. And so what makes them evil is that they believe that the ends justify the means. So they'll do anything to get there.
So yes and no. But to me, like, a villain is an evil villain when yes, they believe that they're doing a good thing for an audience of one. Then.
Right.
Yeah.
But we have people, and I don't want to use real world anything because I don't want this to get political. Yeah. But there is people that are doing things right now that are causing a lot of grief and pain and misery and death. And they think they're doing greater good for all of humanity. And so again, I don't want to get into it, but they aren't doing it for an audience of one. So you can do things. So
but that's different. That to me is a different kind of villain. That to me is the kind of villain that isn't necessarily, like, maybe you do want to be in their head because you want to evoke the doubt of the reader of, are these guys really evil? Like, you want those questions to arise with the reader, right? And you do that best by being in that villain's head. 700 odd years ago, no, a little bit longer than that. 800 years ago, Sweden invaded Finland and colonized Finland because they were like, we need to crusade and save their souls from their pagan ways, and wrecked, you know, the Finnish culture of the time and replaced it with the Swedish one because they were like convinced that they were doing the right thing.
So I was trying to look it up back in the 90s. In Africa, there was the massive slaughtering of like over 100,000.
Rwanda,
Rwanda.
The Houthis and the Tutsis.
Yeah, the Houthis, I think is what it was.
Rwanda genocide is what you're looking for.
So, you know, with that, but it was a lot of Houthis killing Houthis. They were just convinced that this group of people were evil. Yeah. And so they did what they did. But I want to say, if I remember correctly, over 100,000 women were raped during that thing. Like, there's no way you can tell me that you were good. No. Like, you're not on the good side of history if you're committing genocide and murdering people and raping people and all of that.
No, you're definitely not. But these people believed it because of their perspective, what they've been told. And somebody at the top sold them this.
Oh, yeah. Well, there was that one radio station that for 9 months just kept going nonstop. Those people are evil. Those people are the reason why your life sucks. Those people, you know, aren't even human. Yeah. And that's why I'm so against, like, what's happening today in the world is the them versus us. And I'm so against that, because as soon as you create a them versus us, them stops being human, and you can do some amazing, horrible, like when I first started studying this is because I found out I wasn't raised this way. So I didn't find out this until I was very much an adult. I think it was in my 40s when I discovered that I was actually a Polish Jew. Again, we don't practice any of that in my family. And actually the woman, my great grandmother, who was the last actual Jew, my great grandfather, who was the last actual Jew in our family, married a Catholic woman. Yeah. And then from my great grandparents down on my dad's side of the family, they all practiced, you know, Christianity. But when I found that out, it really made me kind of interested, more so than I had ever been, in what happened in World War II and all that. And because the question I really had was, Germans in the 1920s and 30s were God-fearing, loving, caring, kind, hardworking people. How do those people commit genocide or condone genocide?
Well, you know,
you create them into a them. You create them into an other, and then they're no longer human, and so you don't have to have human compassion for them, because they're not, even though like you're sitting there looking at a dead 3-year-old child, and that should break your heart.
It doesn't.
It's like looking at a dead, calf or a dead bird or whatever. It's like, okay, but it's just an animal. It's not even human, so I don't have the same feelings. And so that's why I'm very much against this whole polarizing that we're going through right now, is because it's in human history, it's never led anywhere good.
Never led anywhere good.
It's always led to horrendous things.
Where you shouldn't be in the villain's POV is if you don't want to make their motive, like if you want to humanize the villain, right, and you want to kind of have that doubt in the reader's mind, then it is perhaps a good idea to go into the villain's head and to show that kind of humanizing aspect there. But if the villain is like one of those villains who is basically like they are driven by their personal ambition, what's personally good for them, etc., don't go into their head. You're losing tension for no reason.
And I 100% agree. And that was the second part of that, was that I just wanted to differentiate between someone who is doing evil because they don't care. They want to do it because it gives them something. So I guess that's the same thing. The mass murderer did get something out of it. They got some type of physical, mental pleasure, fulfillment, whatever. I mean, it's beyond my comprehension because I don't have that, which is why I would never write a story of a mass murderer, because I can't, that's something that I can't empathize with. I've said this before, that the number one thing that I think writers need is empathy. You need to be able to become, like, I can become the CEO that literally destroys an entire, town and creates cancer amongst everybody because it makes them more money. So going back to that Julia Roberts movie, that was an actual
Erin
thing.
Brockovich.
Erin Brockovich. So I can understand that. I could absolutely write that story. I could write the corporation just being soulless and not caring because we're going to make all this money, and that's really all that matters. I can't write somebody who walks into a school and slaughters children. That I could write that it happened. Like I could write a story where the villain did that, but I would never go into that villain's head because I can't relate to that. I can't even though I understand that they're getting some type of sick fulfillment out of it.
I would not be able to. It's the same as a serial killer. I would not be able to write.
I loved watching Dexter. It was one of my favorite shows. I watched all of it. Not the new stuff. I just haven't had a chance to get around to the new stuff. So I don't even know if it's good or not. But the old show, one of the things that attracted me to it is I knew I couldn't write that character. And so anytime there's a character that I know I can't write, I really like watching them because it's beyond my ability to do it. So now I can just enjoy the ride just like a regular fan. Even though the writers of the show made me empathize with Dexter, and I was rooting for him, I still, even now after watching 8 seasons of that, I can't write that character because I could never, because when I'm writing my characters, I believe in what they're trying to do. I become them because I'm a method writer. I've talked about that before. I could never become Dexter. I could never kill because I need the pleasure of killing somebody. And so, yes, they won with Dexter because they were like, he needs to kill somebody. He can't stop himself from killing. But look, he's doing the right thing and he's killing bad people. Okay, great. That wins me as a fan. But again, I can't empathize with that. I could never write that character and it'd be as good as what Dexter was. I would fail. It would come off as fake because I would always feel that I wasn't empathizing with it, kind of is what I mean. So I just want to differentiate between a character who's doing something selfish for themselves and a character who is doing something where they believe that, yes, they understand that it's horrible to murder, I could never empathize with the desire to kill 1.2 billion people. It just doesn't even register in my head of how you could even justify that. Even if the entire human race was going to die, if we didn't do it, I would rather the entire human race die than murder 1.2 billion random people. Finishing up this little section before I jump on to what you said or just a second ago, because I disagree with that and I want to have that discussion. I don't want to put the reader in that character's head because of the fact that, like you said, it ruins the tension. It also, so like Jaime Lannister, I hate that they made him the good guy. I loved hating him. I got pleasure as a fan wanting to see him get his comeuppance, and to not only him not get his comeuppance, but to then have to root for him to win. I didn't want to do that. And I think it's one of the reasons why the fourth book was less impactful on me than it could have been. I think it ruined the Jamie character by making him sympathetic, by making him the character. We need villains in our stories because this is fiction. It's about, you know, that conflict between two sides of something. And then we're going to get our human message from that, because that's what you're doing. And so when you, and I guess this will just slip into what I want to talk about. I actually disagree with making villains sympathetic, because then you, again, in my opinion, you take out that tension, you take out that whatever. I would say the best example of almost making it sympathetic, or, you know, being in the villain's head, but not actually crossing that line. And it's a movie, but The Fifth Element with the Gary Oldman character. Like, if it was a book, we were inside of Gary Oldman's character's head. Zog, I think his name was. We were inside of Zog's head. We knew that he was just a piece of garbage trying to save his own skin, because he believed that the human race was going to die. And so why not go ahead and help have that happen, because it's going to happen anyway, whether I help or not. But if I help, I don't die. You know, I get to save my skin. So the way they ran that character through that movie, even though you understood his motivation, and even though you understood, I mean, because think about that. One of the things I love about that Zog character is it starts off as your normal, rich, corporate, I'm not going to get my hands dirty, I'm going to hire people to do it, but then they fail. So I'm going to spend more money and hire better people to do it, and they fail. You know what? Screw it. I'm going to grab a gun and I'm going to go do it myself. And then, he failed. So like that showed how much he was willing to actually get his hands dirty to get in there to accomplish his goals, that he was not going to lose until he was dead. And so I thought that was really a wonderful villain. And even though I knew his motivations, it didn't matter. You're still a piece of garbage, and I can't wait for you to get your comeuppance. Like, I'm still rooting for him to lose. Yeah. And I think if you humanize them, like if let's say they went a different direction with that, and it's like, well, I'm actually, if I do this, I've worked out a deal with the aliens that all children under the age of 10 and enough people to take care of them and raise them will be spared. So I'm actually, the human race is gone. We're all going to die. And again, this is just his belief, because the other side of that would be, well, we could just fight the aliens. We could just defend everybody. But he chose to go the other way. And let's say we found out that he was actually saving all the children of Earth. That's a pretty noble, kind of thing. Of course, his
also
means,
himself.
Right. Well, he is.
Yeah.
But now you've humanized him. Now you're like, well, okay, he is being selfish and he is saving himself, but he's also worked it out to where he's saving every single child under the age of 10. So like literally, I kind of get that. I would rather just stand up and fight the aliens. And, if I die, I die. If we lose as a race, we've come together as a race to fight this evil, or, this not evil necessarily, but this invading force. I would rather go that route. But I think that would actually hurt the Zod character if you gave him that motivation, if you actually humanize him to that level where,
well, in that story, it certainly would hurt.
Right.
Some of the other stories that I've read. So one of my favorite authors is Jacqueline Carey, and her main villain, Melisande, man, there's a lot of you have a lot of hatred for her, but throughout the series there's some humanizing elements. Now, she's never fully humanized. The story never goes like, oh, she could, like she was right. No, understand, like she remains a villain, but you do come to a point where you're like, okay, I can see her point of view. She still deserves everything that's coming to her.
Right.
but I can see her point of view, and it makes that story stronger.
Right. And that's what I wanted to differentiate. There's a difference in letting the audience understand the reasoning behind the villain versus humanizing them and actually, having those save the cat moments, for lack of a better term, where you actually are like, oh, the villain is villainous, but look, they're actually saving this kitten from a tree. So they're not all bad. And so I think a lot of writers, especially new storytellers, will fall in the trap of, well, okay, yeah, the villain's going to be the villain of the story. And yeah, they're going to die in the end. And yeah, they're trying to kill all of humanity. But I want to humanize them a little bit. I don't want them to be all bad. What you're doing is you're actually weakening the story, because this is fiction. Yes, in the real world, every human being, even if you're Hitler, he was an artist. Like, he started off in art school. So he had some things that made him more relatable, more human than just being a monster who slaughtered 20 million people and took, the entire human race into conflict. Like, he's not just that. But if I'm writing a story, I don't want my readers to have any of the good stuff about Hitler. I want him to just be the villain that we're going to defeat, because all of that is fake. I say this all the time. It's not about the characters. It's about the reader getting the fulfillment of their unknown expectations. And by humanizing Hitler in a story and not letting us hate him to the level that we need to hate him to consume whatever message that you're delivering, you weaken the ability to deliver that, is my point.
So as I say, it depends. Like, it depends on the villain and the story and so on.
Of course.
And maybe it's a fake villain. Of course, you could be telling a story where, it's actually the redemption arc of the villain, and in the end, the villain's going to turn around and save the heroes from the actual villain or something equivalent.
And as long as you don't have that villain murder children like they did with Darth Vader, then, I will go with that. Yeah. But if you have them do irredeemable stuff, I'm sorry, it's irredeemable. They need to die. I'm never going to call them a hero. But anyway, we've already discussed that. Yeah. But my point is that never lose fact of and it kind of comes back. We said this earlier. There's a difference between you, the writer, thinking it'd be a cool thing to do, and the reader agreeing that it was a cool thing to do. So the reader always wins out with me. If there's a conflict between writer Drake and fan Drake wins every time, because fan Drake is representational of the people and writer Drake is representational of the dictatorship government. And so, fan Drake is always going to win every single time.
So, okay, so we've spoken about the first of the things that you want to talk about, which is, don't do the villain if all you want to, don't be in the villain's POV if all you want to convey is plot information. In that case, try a peripheral narrator. So what's the second?
Oh, and also don't humanize the villain.
Don't humanize the villain.
I wanted to spend some time, and I know we're getting close to the end of this, but I want to spend some time talking about having a POV villain. It's something that I'm doing in the realm. It's something that we've talked about in the story that we're working on. As far as maybe doing that, stay tuned for another episode. We've obviously been working on it offline, so we've got some things that will be revealed from that. But that is an entirely different animal. And so me and my team have had a lot of discussions on, okay, we have a POV. Okay, she is a villain trying to destroy the world. Now she's trying to destroy the world so that she can, because she's a religious zealot and she's trying to bring her God into this world so that she is happy. The byproduct of that is her God is going to kill everyone up that isn't her race. So now it's, okay, how do we write this character and actually give her a story arc? Because the payout is, okay, so that's the payout of that character.
Right.
but we can't get there. Or, so the big thing after 2 years of plotting on her has been, because we really haven't started writing her story. We've written around her, but we haven't started, because I've still been struggling with it. I haven't been happy with it. We've been struggling with okay, how do I write a piece of garbage character that's literally her motivation is, and she knows she's going to kill everyone in the world but her race. How do I make her good enough to reach that payout? Why are the readers going to care? And so one of the things, and now we are starting to write on her, because the big switch that's happened over these last 6 months is we're not writing her as a villain. She's no longer trying to kill every race but hers. She has no idea that that's coming, just like nobody else has any idea that that's coming. And so therefore
she's just trying to get her god into the world. Like, that's all.
Actually, not even that. I couldn't even figure out a way to do that. Okay. So I've changed it completely in what her story arc is. And it worked out really. It fell into place, as it always does if I just work on something long enough. Pieces fall into place magically. Her story is she's a hero, start to finish. And when things go squirrely, or even if they go squirrely, because that's the other thing is I've changed it so much that technically somebody else could be doing what she originally was slated to do. And so by adding that element in, that it could go either way. It could literally go either way. So originally I had the pillar that you had the prophesized one and the anti-prophesized one. I kind of talked about that before. Now you just have a pillar of two people that both believe that they are the chosen one, both have their own prophecies that are very intertwined, but they're different enough that there's no way both of them can be right. One of them is going to be wrong. And one of them in saving the world. So they're both trying to save the world, but one of those is obviously going to destroy it. And so, and now you don't know which one it is. And you really don't know which one it is even now, because I could go either way. That was the thing. Like, I couldn't get to the point where I wrote the villain, a villain character, and made you like them enough to get to the payout at the end. It didn't work, unless I was just going to write them as a villain all the way through. And then it goes back to the first two things we were talking about, where it's then, why am I in their head? I don't want to be in their head. I want to love hating them. I don't want to humanize them. I don't want to do any of this other stuff. So that was the big problem that I ran into. And I think there's so many people that are attracted to, well, I'm going to write a story from the villain's perspective. But I think the only way, the closer you can get to that, is the anti-hero. A hero that still ends up succeeding and doing good things, but maybe like, Deadpool. Deadpool is absolutely an anti-hero. He literally murders everybody, but he does it. And Dexter's an anti-hero. We've already talked about that too. Absolutely a villain in his actions, but is at the end of the day saving lives and helping good people and helping law officials that can't get the evidence on this one person. But so we're just going to kill him because he should have been killed anyway. He should have been on death row. And since the system won't put him on death row, Dexter will put him on death row. Like, I think that's the closest you can get to writing a villain as a POV, is to go down the path of more of an anti-hero.
I do want to raise one other topic, but it's a topic that I feel you have to be extremely strong for if you're going to try for it as a writer, and that is a tragedy.
Right.
So, because you can absolutely write a tragedy from a villain POV.
Can you?
Well, I think so. Like, especially if you think about something like Macbeth. Macbeth's slow descent to villainousness is kind of the point of that play.
Certainly.
Right. And if that was a story, you would have Macbeth and Lady Macbeth as POVs, and you would watch them make all the wrong choices to end up as the villains of the story and die tragically.
Right. But so here's why I say, can you? And let's just continue on with Macbeth. They aren't doing it as villains.
No, but it's the descent to villainous. It's the descent to villains.
Well, but see, I don't even think it's a descent to villainous. I would disagree on that. It's sure they descended to doing bad things, but they literally never, like, they hated their decisions every step of the way. So it's like, going back to that king that murdered all the 1 and 2 year olds. He did that on purpose. That's a villainous thing to do, and he was fine with it. Macbeth, in the same situation, just to tie the two together, we accidentally made a decision or the decision we made accidentally murdered all 1 and 2 year olds, and we feel horrible about that. So I don't think they were ever actually villains. They were just poor decision makers. And then at the end, it ended tragically for them. So I still think they were good people trying to do good, but just absolutely making the worst decisions. And not just because of like that, where they, the whole thing that I just said about the killing of the people, it was, or the babies, but it was, some of the decisions they made were very selfish, and some of the decisions they made were, because of pride.
Yeah, but my point is you can write a tragedy like that, where the you can see the person making the wrong decisions at every turn and ending up in a tragic.
Well, the challenge is, and the maybe it's just a difference in definition at this point, and we're just splitting hairs. I don't see that character as a villain. So reason why I said, can you write it? The reason why Macbeth works is you actually feel sorry for them at the, like, man, you guys could have done so much and you wanted to do so much, but you just screwed it up. Like, and I feel bad for you. Starting off with a villain that is literally selfish and literally doing, things, and then it ends in a tragedy for them. You kind of wanted them to die anyway. So and that's why I'm saying I don't know if you can write a tragic villain, because if I want you to lose and die, and at the end you lose and die, isn't that a feel-good story? like isn't that a happy ending at that point?
What I mean more is, like, you can do the descent,
Absolutely.
into becoming a worse. And I've actually seen an interesting story that's not published yet, but that somebody sent to me, where this person actually did that in a very interesting way. So they have, it's not a every other POV, it's every now and then you get a chapter from this dude, and you can kind of track him making the wrong decisions, and you can see he's going to become the villain, and you're like, no, don't do that, don't, oh god damn it.
Right.
Yeah. And then you've got the heroic POV that you can see is going to, like, oppose him,
right. But and again, you're still, it still comes to that payoff at the end, and the payoff of a tragedy is that I learn a lesson because I feel bad for what happened to you. You made the wrong decisions, and I see that, so therefore I learned that I shouldn't do that stuff, but I feel bad for you that you did it and had to go through this horrible thing. If it's a villain, I don't know if you can, I just don't think you can write a tragedy off of that. If it's a piece of garbage that I want to see die.
So I wouldn't, as I say, I wouldn't start with a villain in that. I would start with them as a good guy and write the story as their approach to villainous.
But technically, every single action adventure story is a tragedy if you wrote it from the, like, Hans Gruber just wanted to get a little money, and like, he didn't want anyone to die. He didn't want to, actually he did, because his plan was to kill everybody on the roof and make it look like he also died in that accident. So I should take that back. But still, if we wrote that from Hans Gruber's standpoint, but if we wrote it from his standpoint, then technically it was a tragedy that Bruce Willis killed him at the end, because it's like, man, the dude just wanted to get a paycheck, and now this cop from, like, the other side of the freaking country that shouldn't even be here, shoots him in the head and knocks him off a building. Like, what a horrible tragedy. It isn't.
If I was writing it from Hans Gruber's perspective, it wouldn't be about, like, a tragedy. It would be a story of one man getting overly clever.
Right. But again, so technically every single feel-good ending story is a tragedy if you wrote it from the other side. So that's why I was like, I don't know if you could do that. But still, tragedies are an interesting aspect of it.
And so are villain POVs. Villain POVs are an interesting take on the situation, like having a POV who is a full-blown POV. But if you have a villain POV who's a full-blown POV, then they must be treated as a character. They must have a growth arc that thematically ties into the theme. They must have equitable screen time. They must be treated as a character.
Right. And that's where it brings me back to the reason why I want to talk about trying to do a villain as a POV character. Probably one of the best examples would be Jaime Lannister.
Yeah.
But again, it backfired, at least to me. And I'm sure there are fans out there, and you can let us know down in the comments, but I'm sure there are fans out there like, no, I grew to love Jaime, and he's one of my favorite characters from that series. Great. It's subjective. Everybody comes at it from their own thing. For fan Drake, it ruined that character for me, because I don't want to like him. He threw a child off of a roof. He basically has a child with his sister. Like, I don't want to like this guy. And I don't want to feel sorry for him because he lost a hand. I don't want to feel sorry for him because he lost his, way, and now he's out in the middle of nowhere with this girl that doesn't like him and blah, 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 blah. I don't want any of that. Like, I don't want to feel sorry for him. So that's the problem that I have with writing a POV villain, because you're going to have to, either you're going to make him a piece of garbage, you're going to make him Hans Gruber from start to finish, and I'm never going to like him. I'm going to skip those chapters, because why would I want to read this guy because he's just a piece of garbage? Or you're going to try to humanize him, and if you did your great job of making him make me hate him in the beginning, you're going to have resistance from a lot of fans that are like, I don't want to like this guy.
Yeah.
So I think that's where this all comes down to. The whole thing about talking about writing from a villain's perspective, writing villains, it really comes down to that. You have to please the fan.
Yeah.
And so don't fall into the trap of thinking that you're clever as a writer. Stay with the fact that we need to please the reader.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that is a great note on which to end this POV on this podcast on villain POVs. And we will see you soon for another one.
Bye.